Hi, folks. Before we get started with today's podcast, Anna and I wanted to share this great conference coming up on September 12th to the 15th. It's called PXP for Patients by Patients, Partnering to Make Research Stronger. It's a free virtual event entirely designed by patient partners and is all about patient engagement in research. Regardless of your experience of patient engagement, this event is intended for people of all experiences. It starts with an introduction to research and patient engagement. I've registered and I'm looking forward to strengthening my own skills and knowledge and hope you'll consider doing so too. Did I mention it's free? And it's recorded in case people can't join live. You can't beat that. So visit pxphub.org to learn more and to register today. Thanks so much for listening. And now on to today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on As Per Usual, a podcast that explores the current state of patient engagement in Canadian research and how to make it better. My name is Bryn Robinson, and today we've got two wonderful guests to talk all about awareness. In our study, participants raised concerns about the lack of awareness of patient engagement that still persists in the research community. After nearly a decade of SPORE in Canada, what gives?
Oh boy, Bryn, what gives is absolutely right. So then, how do we move into a preferred future state in which there is widespread awareness of patient engagement in research, including of its benefits, preferred approaches, as well as even how to get involved in it? Well, our workshop participants suggested that enhanced knowledge mobilization practices, where research findings are readily accessible by the general public, is a step in the right direction. This means moving beyond only publishing study findings in scientific journals to also regularly sharing research finding through a wide range of mediums and products, including podcasts such as this one. Workshop participants also suggested that there needs to be an established space for current and potential research partners, including the public who wants to just get to know about patient engagement in research and health research in general, to connect, and that also publicizes ongoing and completed research and hosts conferences and other public events. So, those are two big picture approaches to increasing awareness of patient engagement in research. And with us today, we have two guests, Ray Martens and Dr. Tina Fahim, who will be sharing their individual and collective experiences with raising awareness for patient engagement in research. Thanks again for joining us today. Tina, could you start us off with letting the listeners know a little bit about your research background and whatever else you'd like them to know about you? And then Rachel, could you do the same?
Happy to. So my name's Tina Fahim. I'm an implementation scientist at the Knowledge Translation Program at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. And so I really view myself as a methodologist, and the goal of my work is to make sure that we're putting evidence into practice. And so we work across a number of different disciplines and different levels, and really just support different stakeholders to make sure that evidence is patient oriented, but it's also being implemented. And so our projects range from everything to implementing clinical initiatives at the hospital level to supporting policymakers to make sure that they're using evidence in creating policy. And the common thread that we try to include in all of our projects is an integrated knowledge translation approach, meaning we really want to make sure that patients or members of the public or those who are going to be impacted by the research have a say in shaping our research questions, our initiatives, our evaluation, and then finally the dissemination.
And for myself, I have the honor of living, working, and playing in Treaty 7 territory in southern Alberta, and I function as a knowledge broker, which is sort of a growing role as of late, where it's an opportunity for people to go, for someone who works in this role, to go out into the community and to share the concept of research overall. To share that through information that might not necessarily be regularly democratized with a certain population of people, make connections with researchers and community members who might have an interest in partnering together, things like that. So it's a lot of it's kind of like being a bit of a research influencer or a matchmaker, but with knowledge would be kind of a short version of that. This work has had me split my time between both McMaster University as well as the University of Calgary with the Israeli Accelerator. So some of the work has focused on folks within the disability community overall in Canada, and that has had a variety of impacts over time, not only with the work that I do, but also as a research partner with lived experience myself, and being able to share and reflect on those experiences in order to show other people what awareness raising can look like in this area, and that what it means to partner and how that can fit into a person's life as well too.
Influencer, that's the first time we've heard that mentioned on the podcast. That sounds like a perfect term for especially this topic. So Ray, could you tell us about some of the cool influencing activities you've been doing for raising awareness?
Well, one area that I decided to jump into with a bit of with as little dignity as I have, I'm a bit of a goof in nature. I met my husband in theater back in the day, in a mime troupe we were both auditioning for, ironically. So the wedding had a lot of goofy mime jokes along the time in terms of how we met. But that has offered an opportunity to take humor and talk about my own life and things like that, and do that on social media platforms like TikTok, and to kind of contextualize the reality of what it means to partner and how that can benefit from a variety of experiences. I've reflected on some of my work within the policy field, having gone to the UN twice, and considering that human rights is a significant knowledge gap with a lot of Canadians. I've helped have the opportunity to contextualize what this means during the last couple of years with COVID, kind of helping defeat some of the misinformation associated alongside human rights, but also saying that you can still partner and participate and get involved and help shape big things along the way. And in some of the other experiences that I've had as well too, I do a lot of writing. I've had a few exchanges as well too, just within the community, just finding unusual spaces in which to share these experiences and help tell the story. I'm a big fan of the storytelling nature of that, and I do that through not only just the dynamics of just the usual types of talks, but I do that through photography as well too. So I get to share kind of the reality of my life and how that fits within the broader world. So it's nice to be able to be creative in this space for sure, and just to kind of think about how unusual mediums can sometimes be more impactful in some respects as well.
That's so cool, Ray. And I heard that you and Bryn once baked bread and talked about patient engagement and
That
research.
we
How was
did. That was
that?
a magical time.
Oh, that's so awesome. And what about you, Tina? Could you tell the listeners a little bit about some of the initiatives you've been engaged in to raise awareness?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the number one thing is, just given the nature of my role, we're often called in to kind of consult on different projects, different grants. And so that's a really fantastic opportunity to work with different scientists and researchers across disciplines and across institutions. And for me, that's really been a fantastic platform to raise awareness. People bring us in to consult on a very specific piece of knowledge translation or knowledge mobilization, but it's often an opportunity to highlight to them how we can include patient partners on the grant, or how we can build in resources or a research question that really emphasizes that patient voice. And I think being able to have those conversations very early on in the grant development process or in the protocol writing phase has been absolutely critical, because it allows us to think very early on about what resources do we need to do this meaningfully, and to think about that as an essential component and an essential objective of our research study, rather than an add-on once we've kind of shaped our scientific objectives. So that for me is really the bread and butter, is bringing it up in every kind of review or a consult that we do. But in terms of kind of a formal initiative, one that comes to mind is the roundtables initiative that we ran with the Ontario Spore Support Unit. And so the OSU, the Ontario Spore Support Unit, actually funded a number of demonstration projects, and they provided seed funding to these different researchers to make sure that they had the tools and the resources to build meaningful relationships with patient partners, and then use that to fuel these projects. And so it was really nice. They had a whole supplement in the CMAJ describing the different projects. And so what the OSU wanted to do at study end was to have a dissemination event to really feature and showcase these projects and to talk about the impacts of patient-oriented research, and also to look at lessons learned across the different projects. So we were brought into this initiative through the SPORE Evidence Alliance, and we helped run these roundtables. So I think we had 15 study teams that came together to present their findings. And we were able to bring together a really diverse group of stakeholders that included members of the government, both federally, provincially, municipally. You had different research networks, different policymakers, health organizations, patient partners, of course. And it was really an opportunity for these research teams, accompanied by their patient partner leads, to tell the stories about what they did, what they learned, and to disseminate their findings directly to these decision makers. And what result, we thought it was going to be mostly a one-way dissemination, but it was actually a fantastic conversation where people were able to showcase their research, but it was also a platform for these policymakers to also give the researchers feedback about what they need and what they need to make decisions and what type of data and outcomes they need in order to drive policy and decisions. So that exchange was really invaluable and was really different than a lot of the traditional dissemination forms we've taken. The other really nice thing is we were able to kind of zoom out from the individual projects and think about what we need to do to change our systems to be more conducive to patient-oriented research. So of course, we all know that there's time investments, resource investments needed to do patient engagement in a non-tokenistic way. But we are also able to zoom out and think about how does our REB run? How is our data collected? And how are our process conducive to supporting this research or not? And some of the individual teams were able to change some of these processes through their projects. So that was a really fantastic kind of takeaway from that initiative, is there are a lot of things we can be doing at the system level to facilitate patient-oriented research, and having that awareness by the people in charge of these systems was really fantastic.
That's really interesting. And I had a question, but I'm like, something you said, Tina, made me think, okay, I actually want to ask a different question now. And it's for both Ray and for Tina. And so maybe Ray, you can start with the dialogue. That's interesting because, oftentimes we do feel it is very much this just churning out stuff, but what kind of reaction, what kind of dialogue are you getting? And do you think that's raising awareness more? Or do you think that's like, for example, on TikTok, like your videos, are you having dialogue that maybe you wouldn't have had, or had those conversations you wouldn't have had it previously?
I have to some degree, but because part of the reason really ends up being, I think recruitment, like study recruitment, considers things as being transactional. You go out, you ask, you push that message and say, hey, we need you to do a thing. Then you go do the thing, and then you publish the thing. Whereas when it comes to thinking about engaging and partnering, especially in a marginalized community, and in a community that's often had high risks of paternalism, and had a lot of people dictating the story for them, this is an opportunity to think about engagement and that dialogue as being something that people are not generally won over by a singular exchange in this respect. And they need an opportunity to think about not only the full story, but about the evolution and where this fits within the framework of one's own complicated life. And understanding that to make that first step is an assertion of trust where there hasn't necessarily been trust in that system previously. So it's complicated, but if I can bring humor, warmth, and connection in many respects. I mean, despite the fact that I may identify as a part of the disability community myself and have raised a child who was disabled, I still have my layers of bias that I operate from. So I try to do that with recognizing that as well along the ways too. And that gets recognized in that space. And so I can walk within populations of people who may find these systems suspicious, but also help them to see that you can also do big things and create better things and build things and really assert that term that it says in like the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's basically that we belong in designing spaces,
Yeah.
and people want that to be seen. And so that's one thing that I also bring to researchers as well too, is that it's not just on a moral and ethical foundation in which we do this work. It's literally part of our human rights system as well too.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, and Tina, that's interesting that you got actually that kind of two-way dialogue. That's what I picked up when you were saying about the event. And how did that change how how things have moved forward? Do you try to encourage more of that?
So I think what was really unique about it was, just like Ray said, it's one thing to kind of send out a research brief or to even put out a participant quote. It's another thing to have a patient speak directly to a policymaker or a member of government about their experience in a research study and what their takeaways are and what their concerns are. I think that voice is invaluable, and it really hits home in a different way, even for us as researchers who are interviewing patients all the time and having stakeholder meetings. When a patient partner, co-writes an editorial with us or speaks at a conference with us, I think it just lands in a different way. So I think giving the space for that type of dialogue where the message is not being filtered through a media channel or through a researcher, where it's going directly, I think is very impactful. And creating spaces for that, whether it be something similar to what we've done, which is a roundtable, but also things like this, like podcasts and social media, where people can hear directly from patients who are leading this research, I think is incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. And I mean, like you just said, like you mentioned a number of different events in terms of knowledge mobilization, with podcasts, social media, even more traditional. Like there seems to be this plethora of things out there, but after all these efforts, why is there still a lack of awareness? I mean, that's what our study found, but maybe it's not, is it a perception? Is it real? Like, I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on, after all this time, we have SPORE, we've had it since what, 2014, but there still seems to be slow. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that level of awareness.
Ray, did you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. I think that there's a couple layers to that. In some cases, part of that is definitely system-wise, because there are many times where I find that there is things that we invest in, and we're happy that other people are doing that, and we just don't want to invest further than what we have already. And we need, when it comes to buy-in, it's not just about the fiscal, like funding these initiatives and things like that. It's about really truly authentically believing deeply that this matters for a lot of reasons. And so there's a need to think about how we change its perceptions in a number of different systems. And I would say as well too, it's not from a policy standpoint, not everybody's fully aware of what goes on at a government level in terms of these types of programs. While they know they exist, sometimes there's lack of investment in not knowing who's doing what and where it all goes and things like that. So it's hard to kind of think about the complexities that we navigate within this world. When it comes to other people as well, I think there are interesting models out there that have thought about things at scale. Like I think about there's a patient community called Imagine Citizens here in Alberta, for example, that has well over 1,000 members, and they have thought about intentionally reaching rural communities and people who might have to travel like 3 hours to a local library in order to get internet access. They have operated on very little by way of budget, and have really made a mark on the province in terms of saying that we're here and we're ready to engage. But that comes with people who have the time, who are ready to invest, to go out and to share that message with people. But part of that is really as well acknowledging that there are people within the system who do have the capability, who have engaged for a while, who could exercise leadership qualities if they were given particular guidances. So like one of the programs that I work with is called the Family Engagement Program. And it's the primary course is a 10-week course offering opportunity for people to come together and like researchers and community members and learn about building quality relationships. But one of the next phases of our program has been the development of a leadership academy, which is offering people little characteristics and tools to help them understand what it means to advocate within their local systems and help improve and advocate for engagement and make sure that that happens in wherever they live. And this has actually been a message that has reached a wide variety of people internationally. Our most furthest student was from Suriname. People want to know what it means to advocate for this type of work, like everywhere. So with that in mind, like we give people an opportunity to do elevator pitches. So if you had somebody trapped in an elevator that you wanted to talk to, can you talk about that next step in 3 minutes or less? Things like that. So that offers people that confidence and to think about what it means to find a vision in improving engagement.
That's awesome. The Leadership Academy, that sounds fascinating. I've watched from afar the research program, the family engagement one. So to see it take that next step is really really encouraging.
For sure. And you never know when that happens. I was at a random conference a couple of weeks ago in Toronto, and I ran into a politician I've had just dreamed of having a conversation with. Unfortunately, it didn't happen in that moment, but it was just representative of one of those things where you never know when that comes about, and you want to be ready and have that message in your back pocket to
Exactly.
help move things forward.
That's awesome. Hopefully next time. There will be a next time. We'll put that in the universe now. Tina, what, from your view, I can understand maybe a bit, like having sort of done similar, like working with people, like that constant, always seeming to have to raise awareness that this is a thing, that it's important to include. Have you any thoughts on why that might still be the case after all these efforts that we see on a national level, provincial, what have you?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, awareness is improving, but I think one gap that I've observed is I think sometimes researchers struggle to think, is my research and is my question conducive to patient-oriented research? And I think they have a hard time seeing how patient partners can co-lead the projects they have, because we're very set in our objectives and our PICO questions and our, advancing our science. And so they kind of have a hard time often saying, well, how is the patient perspective going to be incorporated when I have a research question already? And so I think it's a couple of things. I think number one, it's a bit of a culture shift in being willing to change your research question or to add additional questions to reflect what the needs of the population are. And I can tell you there's been entire grants that we've written just because our patient and community partners have said that this is important to them. And it was topics that we would have never, researched on our own. And so, but I think that's a culture, and you have to have an environment that's supportive of that. But the second thing, I think we need awareness on how to actually do patient-oriented research and to show researchers that it's more accessible than you think it is, right? It's not an impossible feat. It requires some time, it requires an investment, but it is feasible, and it's feasible for all different types of research. And so that's why I think it's been really fantastic to see groups like the SPORE Evidence Alliance, who do a lot of systematic reviews and meta-analyses, research that I think traditionally we wouldn't think is conducive to POR, but they've developed entire methodological frameworks and have a whole committee of patient partners who inform the research question and help define outcomes for the review, and then help write research briefs when the studies are done and advocate for evidence being put into action. So I think more and more, crossing kind of disciplines to talk about how to do patient-oriented research is really valuable. But I also think we need a little bit of work about multidisciplinary approaches to making research efficient and patient-oriented. And I can give a quick example from some of the work we did during COVID. we were approached by immunity researchers who really wanted to assess seroprevalence of COVID in long-term care populations. And so they approached us because we had relationships with a lot of these long-term care homes. And what we said back was, this is a fantastic study, but we need to make sure that we're also addressing the needs of the long-term care homes. And what we ended up doing was running kind of a multi-arm study where we partnered with the homes. We did needs assessment to figure out what supports they needed, help them implement their IPAC, their vaccine strategies. We implemented wellness strategies to deal with the mental health burnout that was going on in homes. And because we were able to kind of build that trust and address needs, we were also able to facilitate the fantastic work of our colleagues that informed some of the vaccine policy in Canada, right? And so I think thinking about these things a little more creatively, that, immunity research is over here and health systems research is over here and KM is over there. I think we can be a lot more creative and efficient to integrate KM or integrate POR in ways that we haven't been before. And I think, just to your point about awareness, we need a lot more capacity building on, if people want to do that, how they can do that.
One last point as well, too. I think this is a conversation I've had with a few sport-related organizations, and I think we all share a similar sentiment that we all have a lot of these really great initiatives and programs that are there and available for training, but we haven't really kind of consolidated what they do and help people have a better track and understanding. Like, I have this goal to meet specifically in terms of where my awareness is or my knowledge is, then you go to this program. You have a different one, you go to this program, things like that. So there is a need to kind of start coming together and thinking about how we can streamline that process a little bit. Plus, when you Google patient-oriented research, you have to know the term first. You can't just say, I want to partner research and get a really good formative understanding of it. So it's not a concept with a digital footprint that's very intuitive for people who are very new to the concept as well.
It's really fascinating, all the work and thinking you're putting into, both of you, both into really building bridges between research and the public, but then also bridges among researchers and the different organizations that are supposed to be supporting us all. And a question that I have, that's something that I've been trying to figure out myself, to be honest, and also I know a lot of my colleagues are doing the same thing. And it's the whole idea that, like, yes, we need to raise awareness by moving our findings beyond just the traditional publications that, like, you don't even get a paper copy of them anymore. So you have it saved as a PDF that you send to people. But then and I know both of you have been involved in many things. So what are ways that researchers and patient partners and whoever can really share their research findings beyond just like going to a conference with your poster or like submitting it into a journal? So what tips would you give to people about that?
That's a really great question. I think that in some respects, depending on what your subject matter is, that really helps shape what sort of initiatives can come about. I have thought about this a lot from the policy standpoint within the world of disability because of just the nature of the work. You have a number of different coalitions who work within the world of disability rights, things like that. But part of that is really coming together and starting to figure out unified ways in which you can have those conversations effectively. Like, for example, when it comes to shaping certain aspects of this type of policy or evidence, that comes with having an awareness and understanding of court cases in some cases in terms of what's established court-related precedent. And that's not exactly in everybody's wheelhouse of knowledge to go down to the CanLII website and know how to search or interpret that and things like that. So if there is a way to start thinking about court cases that could be relevant to people in helping shape better aspects of research on a particular theme, when you all have investments in that, is to figure out ways how you can consolidate that knowledge together and talk about, okay, hey, BC is doing that. Did you know that they're doing that in education law? Different things like that, where everyone attempts to kind of streamline some of the work associated with an overall long-term goal, if you will. But some of that's really challenging because it's very uniquely tedious in a way, because part of it ends up being this particular demographic has a significant data gap associated with it as well. And so people want that burden of evidence, but in order to move forward, we need to collect that evidence and to think about how we can do that. But so we don't aggregate that really well. And we really need to think about moving that forward in more streamlined ways, but also involving community in that, in terms of what sort of repositories could be developed along the way.
Yeah, I totally echo what Ray said. Like, I would say it's two kind of main takeaways. The first is there's no one size fits all. Like, I think it will just come down to the research question, the population you're trying to reach, the issue. And one thing we try to do is create kind of an end of grant or end of project KT plan, knowledge translation plan. And we often involve our patient partners in that process to ask them, you know, where do your colleagues or, you know, other patients, or where do your friends reach out to get their information? And we kind of tailor our products based on what they tell us. And they've been really different depending on the community and depending on the topic. And just, you know, thinking about that upfront is very helpful and can help us save some wasted resources, you know, chasing a video platform because we think it's a good idea, but nobody wants to watch a video. So kind of going, like, again, listening is really important. You know what? I actually just forgot my second point. It will come back to me.
I think you're right, though. I say this phrase a lot: if you build it, they won't necessarily come. And so that's why community involvement is so important in this area.
Yeah, actually, you reminded me. So the other thing I was going to say was to your point of evaluation and measurement is, I think that's another thing we often see, especially when it comes to dissemination, is we're often reinventing the wheel based on what we think are good ideas, and we don't have any evidence about uptake, and we're not investing in the measurements. So, you know, we kind of know the list of different channels, whether it's research briefs or social media or Twitter. We know kind of where we can disseminate, but for every project, we're just trying things out, right? And I think what would be very valuable is to spend a bit more time in these process evaluations and track how many views did this get? Who's actually looking at this? Is it hitting the populations that we want to reach? And so having that and then contributing to a collective database would be very helpful to say, oh, I worked in a long-term care population, you know, the videos didn't work really well, but our Twitter messages did, or whatever it might be. I think collectively contributing to that dissemination science knowledge is really valuable, and I think is a really, really huge gap in the literature right now, both for patient-oriented research, but also just kind of knowledge mobilization in general, I think.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I do wonder if somebody has been analyzing, like, one prime example for me is the dissemination that came about with like the early phases of COVID. Twitter was just Twitter was constantly about the dissemination process at the time. I would love to know if somebody's looking into something like that and seeing how that streamlined along the way when everyone had that focalized. It was a giant work group, if you will, in many respects. And so is that being looked at somewhere? I don't know, but that's just kind of like one interesting example to me that I would find personally very fascinating to see what it means about international collaboration working in a variety of different streams.
That's so helpful, both of you, and it's such an important reminder to consider knowledge mobilization as an aspect of the research cycle, because it is. And so with that, to approach the question and its solution mindfully, and to not just, like you said, start tweeting everywhere or like trying to create TikTok videos. I don't even know how to download it and just feel like I have to, but to rather reach out to experts such as yourselves or other knowledge brokers, and to really start to think about what are the organizations, the target groups that I want to reach, and then how will I know I've been successful? And as patient-oriented researchers, you're right, reach out to the communities, keep working with your patient partners, and develop this plan together. So that was really helpful. Next time I start to panic, I'm just going to take a deep breath and devise a plan.
I was wondering too, actually, Anna, like, you got me thinking about, and I think also the talk about the process evaluation that often triggers in my mind, you know, questions of value, or at least not from me, but certainly when one is asked to sort of prove that it works, like that's often a question. And I do wonder, like, and maybe this is maybe it's actually gotten better. I don't know. I'm kind of curious of your thoughts about raising more awareness about the value of patient engagement. And do you find is it less conversations about that now? And is it more like just showing examples of patient engagement in different research studies, or is there still this need to convince people of the merits of involving people that in decisions that actually directly impact them? As I say that, it doesn't make sense to me, but
I don't have numbers to quantify my answer, but I think one kind of solid pitch that we often use is by involving patients early on and really understanding the needs of populations, we're going to have less research waste, right? And we have lots of examples of implementing initiatives and doing something just because we think it's a good idea. And there's been a lot of work in this space, just kind of showing that often we think we know, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of resources developing programs and apps and interventions that don't actually address needs. And so even just thinking about a resource perspective, there's so much time and money and work to be saved by doing things more efficiently, by speaking to those who are going to be impacted by the intervention, and to actually listen to hear what the problem is. So I think that's a fairly compelling message to send to policymakers. But the more we can kind of quantify that and show how the investment in patient-oriented research changed our plans, and writing process evaluations and unpacking that black box about, like, often I see in manuscripts, in the methods, there'll be a paragraph saying we had patient partners and they advised on this and that, and then it's like the whole study and that's it. But just that, like, if we could write papers on that process, here's what we originally planned and here's how it changed and here's how we engaged people, and evaluating how we're engaging people, and just spending a lot more time in that process evaluation, describing it, collecting those metrics, I think is so helpful and valuable to say, we were going to do this. It might have cost us this amount of money, but we were able to change course and do things much more efficiently. So I think, again, yeah, just kind of thinking about investing the time in those evaluations can be very meaningful, and I think would be a compelling argument to policymakers, to researchers. And on the flip side, I think for patients, patients also need to feel secure that they're not being involved in a tokenistic process, right? And so I think some kind of accountability to say, here's how we intend to use your feedback, or here's how we're going to include you, here's what we anticipate, make sure that their goals and needs are also being addressed. I think it needs to go both ways, right? It's not just what compels researchers and policymakers, but what also compels patients to continue partnering with us, right?
I couldn't agree more, Tina, especially just you mentioning, touching on the notion of potentials for harm in this case as well, too. A lot of people that I work with as research partners have struggled with this idea of thinking that their first exposure to the notion of partnership and really ends up being an extension of their perceptions of how they've been treated in care. And so to me, I feel like this notion of partnership can be an extension of patient and family-centered services in many respects as well, too. But in terms of how people see this type of work, some of that really comes down to I think there's a depth that's really difficult to quantify in many respects. I think about a dear friend of mine who teaches educational assistants or future ones in a university setting. And I sat in on one of her lectures once, and she said, if you don't feel this type of work in your bones, don't do it. And I think that really is reflective of a lot of what goes into this work as well, too, is that feeling that not only you see just from the metrics or in terms of analysis or evaluation, but also how your partners reflect that experience as well, too, as being community-based, as being something that they're attached to, about that sense of pride as their first study is published. All of these things talk about validation of one's story. I've actually started talking about within some of my work, I created a bit of a small framework on the evolution of a person's experience. I call it DICE's L. And it's basically about from the path of discovery towards leadership. And there's even things like investment, catharsis, empowerment. All of these things come into different facets of a person's complicated experience with partnership. So we don't really address the psychosocial aspect of what it means to connect with the system to a degree where suddenly you have that sense of power associated with that and what that relationship looks like, but also that potential and risk to harm in some cases as well too, because we can mandate this work till the cows come home, but at the same time, you can skip a lot of the integral things if you have a total disinterest in the work and risk impacting people in very negative ways as well too. So we need to think about the why and help people better understand that as well too if they are working in this field.
And that's such an important point to consider as we all work together towards raising awareness for patient engagement in research, is to ensure that we never lose sight of really ensuring the capacity is there to ensure that as more patients do become patient partners, that our understanding of patient engagement in research, our collective approaches are there to help ensure that everyone has the best experience possible. So many of these factors that we're discussing through our podcast are interrelated. And I love how every kind of episode builds and ties to each other. So now, before we wrap up, is there any one key takeaway or one key consideration that you'd each like our listeners to walk away with when they are thinking about awareness of patient engagement in research, both maybe in terms of its importance or how they can incorporate it into their own practice?
That's tough. Single takeaway. I don't know if this is the single takeaway, but I think one important thing is I think we need to think about this at a system level and think about the way that we do research and fund research, right? And there really needs to be a system level shift in our investment in patient-oriented research. So putting these resources into building those relationships, building trust, making sure patient partners are compensated, making sure that we're supporting their needs as they give us their time. And right now, grants funding agencies are becoming much more open to that, but it's still not mainstream. So I think that's one kind of system change that needs to happen. And also just from kind of the university research institute perspective is, as scientists, there isn't really any metric that looks at your engagement in patient-oriented research. That's not something we are measured on. It's not something we are rewarded for. It's kind of work that we do on our own, and that can be tough with all of the other competing demands when you have to show your funding and show your publications. There should be space to show that this work is important. And I think if we're serious about investing in patient-oriented research, that also needs to reflect in our assessments and making sure that there's room for scientists to have protected time to do this work meaningfully. So it's not an afterthought once they've kind of met the other demands. And so again, just from a system perspective, setting up research to facilitate these partnerships, reduce research waste, and let people know what's going on across different groups. The way we fund, the way we measure, I think that's really important. I think we'll make a much bigger impact if we think about this a little more holistically.
I think if I were to ponder a couple things come to mind. One of them is don't do this work in isolation. Research has a way of kind of making you just being, moving forward, doing your own thing. But in terms of the steps and the qualities that are necessary to partner with other people, find other people that can support you in your decision making and how you strategize and how you plan, because there's definitely someone else who's thinking, oh, am I doing this right? Am I doing this well? Am I doing enough? Things like that. And just thinking about a comment that I had with a researcher recently, it was that if you are working on something long-term, to consider how to incorporate planning into your work to help your partners figure out how you want to say goodbye and close the door eventually when that study is over. Because a lot of people, well, I mean, depending on the population that you work with, but sometimes there are mental health aspects associated with partnering in this respect. And so to offer them that space to think about how they want to finish up this work gives them that psychological opportunity to say goodbye in a very healthy way, depending on how things go. And maybe they come back, but that's just an opportunity for them to evaluate themselves what this experience was for them and whether or not they want to do it again.
That's wonderful. And thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your thoughts and generously your time to, share more about your experiences with awareness and your thoughts on some of these issues that we're all, I think, trying to wrestle with in our studies moving forward. So thank you so much again to both of you for joining us today. And for those listening, you found us probably on Spotify or Apple podcasts, but we're also on YouTube, where you can have a video with closed captioning. And we also share the written transcript on our Substack. If there's any questions that you might have for us, you can email Anna at anna.asperusual@gmail.com. And you can email myself as well at bryn.asperusual@gmail.com. So thanks to both Ray and Tina for joining us today. And on behalf of Anna, let's keep moving forward and making patient engagement and research the standard, or as per usual. Thanks so much.